calling to order this hearing or roundtable. This is a public oversight roundtable being conducted by the Committee of the Whole of the Council of the District of Columbia. I'm Phil Mendelson, Chairman of the Council and Chair of the Committee of the Whole. Today is Wednesday, February 16th, 2022. The time is 2:18 in the afternoon. And this hearing is being conducted virtually via the Zoom video conference broadcast platform. I believe it's being broadcast live on the chairman's website, which is www.chairmanmendelson.com/live. Again, chairmanmendelson.com/live. The subject of this hearing is implementation of Law 23-269, the Department of Buildings Establishment Act of 2020. DC Law 23-269 was adopted as Bill 23-91 in December of 2020 at the end of Council Period 23 and became applicable as of October 2021, that's last fall, once it was fully funded in the fiscal year budget and financial plan. The law establishes the Department of Buildings, a new agency that will have oversight of construction compliance, rental housing safety, and residential property maintenance activities in the district. The agency will be headed by a director with a chief building official, a strategic enforcement administrator, and a zoning administrator serving as division directors, if I remember correctly, each appointed by the mayor after confirmation by the council for a 5-year term. The existing Department of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs will be redesignated as the Department of Licensing and Consumer Protection. And this will be an agency somewhat smaller than the current DCRA because those functions that are in the Department of Buildings will be peeled off from DCRA. DC Law 23-269 requires the executive to submit implementation and transition reports 60, 120, 180, and 365 days after the applicable date of the law, which, as I said, was October 1st of last year. Today's roundtable, will address the proposed organizational plan, strategic human capital plan, and communication strategy required by the law and submitted by the executive. The record in this matter will close in 2 weeks. That is at 5 p.m. on Tuesday, March 1st, 2022. That's actually maybe a day short of 2 weeks. We have, I believe, 4 witnesses, including the director. And I'm going to call Kathy Zeisel, who's Senior Supervising Attorney at Children's Law Center, Beth Mellon, who's Supervising Attorney and Eviction Prevention Project Director at the Legal Aid Society of DC, and Greg Meow, who is a Senior Staff Attorney at Change Lab Solutions. I will call you in turn to testify. I have statements from Ms. Zeisel and Ms. Mellon, not from Mr. Meow. I think the hearing notice said testimony is limited to 4 minutes, but there are only 3 witnesses and then the government, so I'll let you take a little bit longer, which means, Ms. Mellon, you usually do this. You summarize your testimony. If you want to take a little bit longer, you can do so. So let's begin with Ms. Kathy Zeisel, who's the Senior Supervising Attorney at the Children's Law Center.
Good afternoon, Chairman Mendelson. Thank you for holding this roundtable. As you know, my name is Kathy Zeisel. I'm a DC resident and a Senior Supervising Attorney at Children's Law Center, which fights so every DC child can grow up with a loving family, good health, and a quality education. Thank you for the opportunity to testify about the Department of Buildings, an agency which we all hope will be the key to ensuring that all DC residents can live in a safe and healthy housing. If the Department of Buildings is to succeed where DCRA has failed, we cannot simply replicate DCRA again. We have to explicitly give the agency the mission of ensuring safe and healthy housing for DC residents, but that mission has not been chosen by DOB so far in the documents presented to the council. We have to ensure that it's adequately staffed, which has not yet been done, and that it approaches its missions in new ways, which also has not yet been done. This council and you, Chairman Mendelson, asked the mayor to think big, to do better, and that did not happen so far. The initial plans sent to the council do not seem to set the agency up for success. The first round of plans and the organizational structure seem to be a cut and paste of DCRA's current structure and the Housing Inspections Division. Notably, there's no increase in the number of housing code inspectors or any of the other much needed improvements we've long recommended. The only structural changes seem to be the ones required by the law. The February 2022 communication plan illustrates even further that it doesn't even mention housing code inspections in the plan and doesn't seem to address the serious deficits of DCRA. While we would be happy to work with the city administrator on these issues, it seems at this point the council may need to step in and legislate more precisely what is needed to ensure that we are not testifying next year about why DOB is not working. We have the opportunity now to ensure that this agency does things correctly from the beginning. My written testimony goes into greater detail on recommendations, but there's a few I'm hoping to highlight. First, for DOB to be effective where DCRA has failed over and over, we need to fully and clearly define the core mission of the agency. DCRA currently has health and safety in its mission. DOB has chosen to drop health out of its mission and only have safety, a key oversight in what we hope that the agency will do. Second, in order to build trust in the agency, which we know is going to be necessary for many of the communities in DC, we recommend ward level units of inspectors and actually outreach workers to go into the community, get to know community members, and be more effective at inspections. Third, we recommend completely re-envisioning how we do proactive inspections to better protect safe and healthy housing, affordable housing stock, and for more effective strategic enforcement. Fourth, we recommend that the agency utilize data from many sources, including public health data, and needing to get that data from its sister agencies. Fifth, we recommend that we have more professional inspectors in both the proactive and compliance-based inspectors, and we need them to be professional inspectors who are certified in lead and mold inspections so that tenants are not having to continue to go to several agencies to obtain inspections. The council is going to need to mandate a ratio for inspectors because we see that the mayor did not even ask for any additional inspectors in this proposal. Six, strategic enforcement personnel should not only sit separately, but should actually sit within the inspection division to help ensure that inspections can coordinate and be done properly and with an eye towards how to do strategic enforcement. Seventh, we ask that a high-level public health expert be incorporated within the strategic enforcement division to ensure that this lens is being used in enforcement and planning for proactive inspections and to help interpret the data correctly. Eighth, we ask that the agencies can start executing memorandums of understanding now to share data, work together on inspections and remediation. We anticipate that MOUs will be necessary with DCRA, DOEE, DOH, DC Fire, DCHA, DHCD, and OAG. And we ask that the agency designate a liaison to work with the other agencies. All of the agencies that I named work within the healthy housing space and need to be coordinated for this agency to be successful. We ask that DOB be the central data source for healthy housing data and necessary for strategic enforcement. And finally, we ask that the council designate fines collected go into the nuisance abatement fund so that the agency can act if landlords don't and tenants don't have to continue to wait years to live in healthy and safe housing. We really want this agency to succeed. I think everybody does. And we hope that the council and we hope that you in holding this roundtable will help push the mayor to ensure that this agency is set up for success when it begins. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Ms. Mellon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. My name is Beth Mellon. I'm a supervising attorney in the housing unit at the Legal Aid Society of the District of Columbia. And I want to start by saying Legal Aid seconds all of those comments by the Children's Law Center, and we agree with those recommendations. The goal of setting up this new agency and breaking DCRA into two agencies was really, I think from our perspective, but I think a vision shared by you, Mr. Chairman, and the council, to create a smaller agency with a more focused mission to change some issues with the culture, and frankly, have less of a focus on businesses, more of a focus on residents and tenants, really use strategic decision-making, use data, have a public health lens. And we are just not seeing that coming across in the transition documents released to date. And I just want to drill down on one of the issues. Inspections and enforcement in DCRA right now are siloed. And that is the same structure that's being put in place with the Department of Buildings. And some of the specific problems we see, just to give you a few examples, when inspections and enforcement are not working together, you have inspectors issuing notices of infractions, but they don't cite the right regulations. And so the cases get thrown out when they go to enforcement. You have enforcement not being able to use inspectors for re-inspections not happening. And then we have these appallingly low repair rates. And so for FY21, DCRA was only able to confirm repairs in 42% of the situations with confirmed needs violations. And in FY22, it's down to 34% so far. And then you just have a failure to use the tools the council has created. You know, the agency can do daily fines. They can double fines for health and safety. That was put in place in 2017. They can take away those basic business licenses. But if there is not collaboration and communication within the agency, that's just not going to happen. And we're concerned that the current plan has the same silo of strategic enforcement over here and inspections over here. And those really need to be tightly connected. And then I want to focus on one of the recommendations in our testimony, which is DCRA really having a presence in the community and collaboration with the court. I think this is really timely. And I'm going to give you two examples. One is Stay DC. We saw that once an intensive outreach model was put in place with trusted community partners going out, tenants filed 60,000 applications in a 6-month period. That's an incredible just community engagement and mobilization. And we are trying to apply that same type of model to eviction prevention with some of the new funding the council's made available this fiscal year. And so we're doing outreach with community partners, legal services organizations are, by mail, by phone, in person. We're partnering with other nonprofit organizations, rental assistants, housing counselors. We're partnering with the government agencies and talking to them regularly. We're partnering with the court. And we have a presence now both in the community and in the courtroom of various providers who are all coordinated together. And what has happened with that, we've been applying that model to the scheduled evictions that restarted this fall, and 2/3 of those evictions have been stopped. And that's just unprecedented. And so the Department of Buildings really should be tapping into this model of deep community engagement with tenants and tenant organizations, community-based organizations working with tenants, because eviction prevention is tied to safe housing. Safe housing is stable housing. Unsafe housing too often becomes a tool for displacement. So what would that look like? We think that the agency could assign teams based on wards or neighborhoods to really have that deep engagement, that they should focus on some outreach, some community education. And part of what troubles us, if you look at that strategic human capital plan and communications plan, they list target audiences and stakeholders. They don't list tenants. They don't list tenant organizations. They don't list community-based organizations that work with tenants. They list businesses, trade groups. And that may help with permitting, but that's not going to help with the housing code side of the agency. And so that's an example of where they need to think a little differently, and I think really engage with some other work that's going on in the district that we're really excited about. And if you had that neighborhood ward model, you also could have a simplified way of having referrals from the community, of getting inspectors out there, of having a quick response. And then the other thing would be having inspectors in the landlord-tenant branch of DC Superior Court. So inspectors already are on the housing conditions calendar that's focused on repairs. But as you know, Mr. Chairman, tens of thousands of tenants before the pandemic and the moratorium were passing through that landlord-tenant branch every year. And so for the judges to be able to say, there's a legal service provider here, there's a rental assistance provider here, there's also an inspector here who can come look at your home and see if repairs need to be made and give that information back to the court. That should be the goal. And that is something that the council, we believe, could mandate if the agency is not going in that direction. Unfortunately, it looks like they are not. So those are the kinds of changes we would like to see, and I hope you will ask the city administrator about. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mellon. Mr. Miao.
Good afternoon, Chairperson Mendelson and members of the council. My name is Greg Miao. I am a senior attorney at Change Lab Solutions. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization utilizing the tools of law and policy to advance health equity. And we've partnered with communities across the nation to pursue that goal, particularly within the housing realm through the development of expansive and robust proactive code enforcement and housing programs. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to testify about the important role the Department of Buildings can play in ensuring that all DC residents can live in safe and healthy housing. Over the last 9 years, we've been working with communities, large and small, to develop and implement proactive rental inspection programs that keep people in their homes, improve housing quality, and improve the existing stock of affordable housing in the cities. So I want to talk a little bit about the general best practices that we have gleaned through our work with a number of the communities across the country. And to start with that, proactive rental inspections really require strong housing codes, well-trained officers, and cross-agency collaboration. But we have seen that there are a number of communities that have faced different challenges in accomplishing the goals for a variety of reasons, including organizational, operational, and implementation challenges. So to get to some of those best practices, the first thing I want to touch on is that PRI programs are not a replacement for the complaint-based inspection programs. Rather, they are supplemental to them and really allow for more targeted enforcement of bad actors by special teams and task forces within the inspectional services. Communities like Boston have seen a lot of success in being able to raise the overall housing quality within their community through robust, proactive inspectional programs, while also finding efficiencies through that sort of general lifting of all boats to allow them to target bad actors, repeat violators, and really spend a lot of the energy that's really necessary to bring those enforcement actions against those types of landlords. Second, the most effective PRI programs utilize a data-informed approach to leverage the power of code enforcement to improve community conditions and resident health and well-being. So in doing so, the recommendations are at minimum that the department develop a database that includes the location of the building, contact information, age of the units, code violations, and the remediation efforts. And that is an integrated effort between code enforcement and other agencies, and really requires a lot of collaboration with other agencies that are doing other inspectional services like fire. Using this information, cities can track larger trends in the locality's rental housing stock and choose amongst several strategies to prioritize inspectional efforts. Some cities like Sacramento have really seen success in prioritizing areas with high rates of code violations or with high rates of the worst types of code violations. Other cities like Kansas City, Missouri, and Syracuse, New York have targeted their inspectional programs utilizing other metrics like the age of the housing stock, exterior housing condition, and also by prioritizing neighborhoods that have often been clamoring for more investment or more attention being paid to the housing conditions that exist within those communities. And finally, very important metrics that must be utilized include include health metrics such as lead poisoning and asthma rates that have a high correlation to housing conditions and really are important in helping communities address the existing health disparities that exist within our neighborhoods. So I understand that I'm running out of time here, and I wanted to just touch base on a few more of the best practices quickly. And I wanted to really touch base on the incentivizing that PRI programs and the way that these things work best is through the combination of including robust enforcement mechanisms such as license revocation and the partnerships that are necessary with housing court and the code enforcement officers and the legal team to really effectuate those, but also through compliance incentives. So structures that incentivize voluntary compliance for the 90% of good landlords out there that want to comply. And so things that will do that include tiered structures that reduce inspection rates and inspection fees for good actors, while also increasing inspectional frequency and fees and fine structures for properties that are found to be repeat violators. Thank you.
Thank you. And will you send us a copy of your statement, please?
Yes, I apologize for that. I will send it as soon as we hop off.
All right, that's fine. Thank you for that. I only have a few questions. Let me say that I think you all know, we will be having an oversight hearing of DCRA in a couple of weeks. And then we have a hearing on DCRA's budget and also the Department of Buildings budget roughly a month after that. I thought it was worth having a separate hearing on the Department of Buildings just to get a little bit more focus there, and also to really sort of help set the stage, lay the groundwork, just get a little bit more focused on this for the oversight hearing that's coming up, where it'll be broader issues and therefore maybe not as much time on Department of Buildings. So your testimony is helpful here because it's going to help me with the hearing in a couple of weeks. I did have a couple of questions. One of you, I think it was Ms. Seisel, talked about MOUs. I am going to ask the director about it. We're not always, at the council, we're not always aware of where there are MOUs between agencies because we don't require that we be told about them. But why do you think that so many MOUs are necessary between Department of Buildings and other agencies?
Well, in some of our other work with different agencies, we've found that agencies, even between executive agencies, won't share data with each other without executed MOUs. And we think that for this type of work, there is really particular data that will need to be shared between agencies to develop the algorithm and have the right data necessary for both proactive infection and the strategic enforcement data that they're going to need. They're going to need data from Department of Health, Department of Environment, like between the public health data and also just the inspection data that all these other agencies are doing inspections. In addition, Department of Environment, Fire, DC Housing Authority are all doing other kinds of inspections. DHCD and DOE also hold remediation money and are doing actual remediation. It seems very important that all of those agencies understand what landlords they're working with, what remediation they're doing, who they're citing. And from what I've understood over the past years, none of that coordination is currently happening. And to share that information and data seems essential, but I don't think that it will happen without MOUs, especially if we want it to happen through some sort of computer system that could be set up so that it's actually shared in an organized way that could be a central database. And I say that from having worked on some other funded projects where we're working directly with agencies that they are not allowed to access data that we need from sister agencies without MOUs that take months to set up. So it seems to make sure that we're sense to do it now if we're talking about this agency opening its doors anytime soon.
Okay, that's helpful. And I'm going to ask the director about that. I also wanted to ask about inspections and enforcement. So one of you criticized that it was siloed. It might have been you, Ms. Mellon. And I just wanted to kind of explore that a little bit more. There's no question in my mind, I think we all agree that DCRA has not been as good with enforcement as it needs to be because it issues citations maybe, or civil infractions maybe, and then doesn't really know what happens to them, or doesn't know if the fines are ultimately paid, or maybe does get involved before the Office of Administrative Hearings, but still can't say what happens after that. But in a way, I think we want it separate functions in the new Department of Buildings I see the strategic enforcement officer as being independent of the inspectors, so that it's almost like instead of the inspectors judging their work, you've got somebody separate judging their work. So it kind of argues for being siloed, but with a director who's mindful that, hey, it's not enough to write a ticket, you got to follow up on the ticket.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think the strategic enforcement administrator being separate, that should be someone in their team who really holds that overall strategic direction for the agency and is able to advise. And we think there should be a public health official working high up with that individual. The way we would recommend doing it structurally is having at least a small team of enforcement folks within the inspections division to ensure that you have communication between the two. And so I agree with you that on the one hand, you want that strategic enforcement administrator to have oversight and be independent in a way and not be under the chief inspection officer. But you also want to make sure that the enforcers are talking to the inspectors. And this could be something that is part of the plan and just not apparent from the documents, but it's not apparent from the documents that there is a plan for enforcement individuals to be working side by side and part of the same division as the inspectors. And if that doesn't happen, the question is, how are you going to overcome the problems that we've seen already with lack of communication and collaboration between those two sets of individuals and employees? So I think the way DCRA functions now is the inspectors go do their inspections, they write their reports, and they're done and they move on. And part of this is there aren't enough inspectors for them to really have a broader vision or purpose or mission. They need direction from enforcement on things like, we've sent this case over to OAH. Now we need to do re-inspections to make sure that the repairs are actually done. The repairs haven't been done. Now we need to go more frequently. We should consider daily fines. We should consider where this is a situation to look at the basic business license and revoke it. And the council has put in place some more penalties for landlords that don't have a license. They can't sue for eviction. But if they never lose their license, that good work that the council has done is not going to amount to much. And so it's really making sure that those employees and divisions are talking to each other. One way we have envisioned that is having some of those enforcement folks in with the inspectors as part of the same division. And when I look at the organizational chart, what I see is what we have with DCRA now. You have that strategic enforcement administrator and their staff, and you have the chief inspection official and their staff. And you want to make sure those staffs are working together and really collaborating and communicating while having that strategic enforcement administrator have the independence and be setting strategic direction as you're indicating.
And you lost me a little. So if you have enforcement people in the inspection division, then they're in the inspection division. Unless what you mean is that something like what we do with the chief financial officer for the city, which is where we have agency fiscal officers who work for the chief financial officer. Those agency fiscal officers are in each of the agencies. So on the org chart, they're still with the CFO, even though they are at the agency. Is that what you mean?
I think that is the structure that could work, that they are embedded. And so I understand what you're saying, that on the org chart, it's a question of how do you display this? And I think you can ask the city administrator, is this part of the plan? If it is part of the plan, it's not apparent from any of the documents they've released.
I do think, Chairman, that's what we were talking about, is keeping them under the strategic enforcement oversight. But we were hoping, there's the way it's been structured thus far, there's such a lack of communication. You know, it's our understanding that for a while, the inspection forms had the incorrect law on them and became unenforceable from the inspectors. So to avoid some miscommunications like that, and also the inspectors sometimes have important information that could be used for the bigger strategic picture. So just being able to keep those lines of communication open, but they should be line of supervision up to the strategic enforcement, not inspection. So thinking that that person is exactly what you're saying, really embedded within, but from the strategic inspection piece of it is what we're thinking. But we've been trying to think about how to break down the total lack of communication that I think had occurred in DCRA is what we were trying to address in making that proposal.
Yeah. Did I hear you say for real that they were issuing citations that cited the wrong law?
That was our understanding, that was part of the enforcement several years ago. Part of the problem with enforcement several years ago is that the citations couldn't be enforced. And
This is
then
under-
to the point
under
that you
the-
made, part of our understanding about the OAH issues is that they get to OAH and then the landlord says that it's repaired and there's no second inspection. So they can't say whether it's been repaired or not. And so again, that line of communication needs to be there about when another inspection needs to happen, because they're going to court to figure out, what's going on. Yeah, so it seems like we're just trying to think about how to break down some of those pieces. And I believe Mr. Mao actually used to do enforcement, if I'm not mistaken, or be part of enforcement team and say theirs.
Well, I will just hop in and say yes. I brought enforcement actions in my role as city attorney, and so as part of that strategic enforcement sort of team in my prior career. I don't have a lot to say specifically about the structure of the org chart within this proposal, but what I will say is that in the cities that we've seen that have had the most success in what they're doing here is that the inspections and the purpose of the inspections is actually being driven through that strategic lens of the strategic enforcement officer. The goal that most of the cities have really established is to, as I said, sort of lift all boats, get as many of the voluntary compliers to comply as possible, and then save their resource for strategic enforcement against the reticent landlords that are repeat violators that are, putting the people at the greatest health risk. And so we know that those efforts, enforcement efforts, take the most, resource. They take the most documentation, because the people who are most willing to take on that effort, are also generally fairly resourced. And so just to put it out there, I think Boston has a pretty good example where they have their team of inspectors. They go out, they do their regular inspection, and they've sort of classified those as our proactive inspectors. They also have inspectors within their targeted enforcement team that when they find those reluctant landlords, there's this sort of increased cohesion within that team and being able to, continue to perform those inspections, to do the re-inspections, to issue the citations, to then run it up to the legal team, to then bring the, go to court to actually bring the enforcement action. And that exists sort of as their, special task force. And I think that that's been relatively effective for them in really being able to prioritize how that resource is spent, rather than having it sort of dispersed between all these different inspectors that have different sort of compliance incentives and different practice in terms of how well they're sort of revisiting a lot of the sites where they found violations.
I have one other thing. It's not so much a question, but I have a hunch that when the mayor sends on the budget, she's going to pretty much just maintain the current level of staffing. And this is an opportunity to increase the number of inspectors. If each of you would give some thought, and I suspect there's a lot of discussion between you, but I wouldn't mind if you did separate analyses on how many inspectors you think we need. And that would include on the proactive level as well. I'm thinking about how the proactive inspection has been from time to time announced or re-announced with a lot of fanfare and sounds good. But what we've seen is that in practice, it's really fallen short, not enough inspectors, and then targeting the wrong buildings. This is really to all three of you. The number of proactive inspectors, the number of and just the number of housing code violation inspectors. There are other inspectors like a vacant property. And some days the director will tell me there's 3 vacant property inspectors, and on other days he'll tell me there's 33 or whatever it is, because everybody can inspect vacant property. So in any event, the committee would benefit from your suggestions. And I'm thinking if you get them to me sooner, I can share them with the executive, but I'm not sure that will actually help, but you're welcome to. Because I think that's going to be part of what we'll be struggling with when we get the budget, is that we need to add millions of dollars to the agency because the executive will have fallen short.
May I ask a question? I heard you say that you're going to do a Department of Buildings and DCRA budget hearings. Do you anticipate Department of Buildings to have its own separate budget in this
Yes,
year's budget? Okay.
I do anticipate that. We'll see, but I do anticipate that. And if I have to find money for additional inspectors, I'm not sure I'm saying this to you guys. I might be saying it to anybody from the executive who's listening. I probably will look at some favorite programs that the executive has. So this isn't like putting it on, they can put it on the council. We'll make it painful if we can. Thank you, each of you, for your testimony. And I'm going to call the director now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So if Ernest Trapper could come forward, which I think means we have to admit him. Give me a second while I copy some notes. Give me a second. Thank you for waiting, Director. When you're ready.
Hello, good afternoon, Chairman Mendelson, members and staff of the Committee of the Whole. I am Ernest Trapper, the Director of the Department of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs, DCRA. My testimony today is about the implementation of Law 23-269, the Department of Buildings Establishment Act of 2020. I appreciate this opportunity to discuss the implementation of this law with the committee and the roundtable participants. The act was enacted on February 2nd, 2021, and it became effective and applicable on October 1st, 2021. The act creates a new agency, the Department of Buildings, which will be responsible for the administration and enforcement of codes and regulations for construction, building, and rental housing maintenance and zoning. The act also redesignates the remaining functions of DCRA as the Department of Licensing and Consumer Protection. Specifically, DLCP will be charged with issuing business licenses, protecting the community against business fraud, registering corporations, issuing occupational and professional licenses to individuals, and regulating special events in the district. The Act lays out several steps in the implementation process, including the submission of a transition plan and timeline. The Act also sets forth reporting requirements. First, the law provides that 60 days after the applicability of the Act, the city administrator must provide an organizational plan and chart to the council. Second, 120 days after the applicability date of the Act, the law requires the city administrator to provide a strategic human capital plan and a communication strategy to the council. Third, 180 days after applicability of the act, the city administrator must provide a comprehensive document control inventory to the council. Lastly, 1 year after applicability of the act, the city administrator must provide the council with a business process analysis and re-engineering assessment and an information technology needs assessment in addition to the transition plan starting October 1st, 2021. And every quarter thereafter, the mayor must provide quarterly updates to the council on the progress of developing the deliverables required by the act. I will now provide an overview of our progress towards implementing the act and next steps. The first deliverable under the act was the submission of an organizational plan and chart. The organizational plans and charts for both the DOB and the DLCP were included in the first part of the transition plan, which was transmitted to the council on December 14, 2021. The organizational plans were developed after a thorough review of the functions and missions of each of the new agencies to ensure that both agencies have the appropriate staffing with the optimal mix of experience, training, and background to allow each agency to be operational on October 1st, 2022. Under the organizational plan submitted to the council, the Department of Buildings, or DOB, will consist of the Office of the Director, Office of Construction and Building Standards, which is overseen by the Chief Building Official and includes permitting, green building, and third-party inspections. Administrative Services, the Office of Strategic Code Enforcement, which is overseen by a Strategic Enforcement Administrator, the Office of Residential Inspection, and the Office of Zoning Administration. The Department of Licensing and Consumer, the DLCP, will consist of the Office of the Director, the Business and Professional Licensing Administration, which would include business licensing and registration, the Business Service Center, the Corporations Division, and Occupational and Professional Licensing, and the Office of Enforcement, which would include the Enforcement Unit, Consumer Protection, and Special Events and Vending. The first installment of the transition plan, which included the organizational charts for both DOB and DLCP,
You've stopped.
my screen froze for a second, it's back on. The second version of the transition plan was submitted to the council on February 15, 2022, and includes the strategic human capital plan and a communication strategy. The strategic human capital plan is designed to achieve the strategic human capital goals of aligning human capital with the Department of Buildings' mission and strategic direction, supporting a culture of continuous learning and development, sustaining a productive and diverse workforce, maximizing employee talent, monitoring and evaluating the implementation and results. The communication strategy outlines the objective of ensuring the district residents and businesses are educated and informed as to the purview of each agency, and establishes the overarching goal of introducing and driving awareness of the two new agencies to district residents and businesses. Additionally, the communication strategy also defines the target audiences and delineates how we will measure success. The Act also requires the submission of quarterly updates to the Council. The first quarterly update was transmitted to the Council on January 11, 2022, and provided a summary of the steps that have been made and are underway towards implementing the Act. Next, I'll turn to the next steps in the implementation process. DCRA is on track to provide the next deliverable, a comprehensive document and document control inventory by March 29, 2022. As required by the Act, the comprehensive document control inventory will identify all documents, collateral, and assets that must be revised to reflect the transfer of responsibilities to the two new departments. DCRA, working with the Executive Office of the Mayor, will prepare the next quarterly report, which is expected to be transmitted to the Council in April. Regarding practical next steps towards a smooth transition, DCRA has over 80 standard operating procedures, SOPs, and policies, and approximately 30 software applications and 50 databases that will be impacted by the transition to two new agencies. DCRA will be reviewing current business processes and SOPs to determine what revisions are needed, and is looking at how to port data systems and functionality to the successor agencies in a way that will be seamless and transparent to customers. In closing, I want to stress my commitment to the implementation of the Department of Buildings Act. I hope my testimony has given insight into the implementation of the Act, and I thank you for the opportunity to present this testimony. I'm available for any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you, Director. The organizational chart on page 12, which is the Office of Strategic Code Enforcement Division, Office of Residential Inspection, shows 25 housing code inspectors, which is the same number of inspectors DCRA currently has right now. What thought has been given or is being given to increasing the number of housing code inspectors as this transition occurs?
As you know, Chairman, through the budget formulation process, that is where we look at our current resource levels, we look at the challenges we have ahead of us and how to align our resources to the challenges. So with regard to the number of inspectors or any human capital or employee changes that are necessary or that we envision, that would take place through the budget formulation process.
Okay, that doesn't tell me anything other than that it depends upon the budget. Have you or anyone in the executive advocated for the new Department of Buildings to have more inspectors?
What we are focused on at this time is transitioning from DCRA to Department of Buildings. As far as advocating for positions, what I do know at this time is it is less so a question of just getting more inspectors, but ensuring that other aspects of the organization, whether it's staff within the enforcement group, staff within the administrative services, staff within the legal service, are all aligned with the mission. So at this time, all options are on the table for us to consider how best to support the needs of residents in the out years.
Well, it's clear to me after 4 years of oversight that DCRA does not have enough inspectors. And it would be very unfortunate if the mayor sends a budget to the council that simply copies the current number of inspectors. As I indicated to the previous, and I'm not getting a clear answer from you whether you have requested of the mayor in part of the budget formulation process that there be more inspectors. If more inspectors are not provided to the Department of Buildings, it would appear that the mayor is not interested in having the Department of Buildings to be successful. I will repeat, it's clear that we need more inspectors. If the mayor doesn't send down a budget with enough inspectors, that is with more inspectors, and if I remember from the last several years of budget testimony, comparing DC with other cities, we are so below in the number of inspectors per 100,000 residents, which correlates to a number of residential units to be inspected, then the mayor will essentially be saying to the council, you have to find the money, and I will look first to any pet projects that the executive may have, which I know doesn't sound very kind on my part, but I want to be clear that this is not a burden I want put on the council. The mayor proposes the budget. She wants us to adopt her budget. She resents when we make changes to her budget, so she needs to propose it correctly. The organizational charts for the Department of Buildings shows roughly 13 program managers across the divisions. So as we looked at the organizational charts, that was submitted December 15th. And we counted up the number of program managers, we counted 13. Can you explain what the role of these program managers will be?
Chairman, what page are you looking at?
It's across all the organizational charts.
All right, so I mean, generally, speaking, the role of the program manager is to ensure that the program that they are running, be it housing or legal construction or short-term rental, is effective and efficient. So the title of a program manager is a generic title that has to be weighed in the context of divisional activities. So when your question is about what would all these program managers do, they are essentially part of our human capital to ensure that the various programs we have are running as efficiently and effectively as possible.
Okay, so that's what they do. It just seems like that's a lot of program managers for a smaller agency. Do the organizational charts, were they simply a exercise in replicating what currently exists in DCRA?
I heard that comment earlier on, and it is a complete lack of understanding of how the agency actually works. A lot of hard work went into reviewing the law and developing a human capital plan to ensure that the transition is not only smooth, but the objective of the law can be best met. As to how that relates to program managers, the previous participants will have to elaborate on the issue they are seeing. One thing that I picked up on was even a comment around the strategic code enforcement officer having to be closer to the inspections division. It is clear on the org chart when you look at page 12 that the chief inspection official is reporting to the strategic enforcement administrator. So, I mean, I don't want to dwell too much on the lack of understanding that it appears some people have, but I'll rather focus on how we can ensure our employees today and those that we are attracting to be part of the new agency have the resources they need. They are prepared to take on the challenge we had ahead of us.
Well, my question was about the organizational plan, not the human resources plan. The organizational plan, which is submitted in December, looks an awful lot like the current structure at DCRA for the Building and Housing Code Enforcement Divisions. Am I correct?
No, there are significant differences. I mean, the law was very prescriptive about the main divisions in the Department of Building, what goes into the Office of Director, what goes into construction and building standards, what goes into like zoning administration, residential inspection, and strategic code enforcement. So, I mean, if there was a scenario that the law didn't contemplate, we can talk through it, but this is not a copy paste. Today, the way DCRA is structured, there's no role as strategic code enforcement administrator. It doesn't exist. It will come into existence based on the new org chart when it comes to Office of Residential Inspections. What we have today is not the same as what is being contemplated on the org chart. So I think we are bringing some experience as operators and implementing laws, and that is worth something. If there's a conversation to be had about tweaks, we are open to it. That's all part of the stakeholder engagement. But it will be really unfortunate for those who don't have a deeper understanding of how the agency works to be suggesting that this is just a copy and paste. It is simply not the same.
In what ways does the proposed organizational structure of the Department of Buildings, in what way does the proposed structure invite collaboration and information sharing across divisions so employees are not siloed in their work?
That goes to the heart of our mission, which is embedded in safety. Safety is a core value that everybody across the organization is embracing. One way collaboration is strengthened is through the data systems being used, not just internally, but also in the public view. So when it comes to, for example, figuring out if there is a violation, everybody in the organization has access to that information. The public also has access to that information. People can figure out what is the violation, the date it occurred, the status, if there's been an enforcement action, for example, a fine, what is the status of that? We publish this publicly as part of our transparency objectives, and we will continue providing that level of transparency, both internally and externally. So I feel transparency encourages collaboration. So that's just one aspect. The second aspect really is about a culture of teamwork, a culture of looking out for each other so that you can apply a different lens. We have a data team that can generate insights based off algorithms for the inspectors to be targeted in their efforts. We see that evolving under the Department of Buildings because, for example, the strategic enforcement administrator, as part of their requirement, will have an annual plan on areas where we need to prioritize. We're doing some of that today. For example, we've analyzed data around the top 15 housing code violators, and there are targeted strategies to do more inspections and, where appropriate, make referrals to the Office of the Attorney General. That is an example of collaboration across different departments.
Well, as you know, I've been critical of the department for not having a sense of mission. Now, I don't expect you to agree with me. And I also think that there might be a difference between the leadership of the department and the rank and file. But last year, as I got more heavily into looking at the vacant property inspections, what I saw was clearly a lack of sense of mission on the part of inspectors or the program, which I guess is more than the inspectors, or I mean it to be more than the inspectors. A lack of a sense of mission. I don't expect you to agree with me, but when buildings are clearly blighted and are in the tax rolls as not even vacant, nobody's checking, nobody's following up. When a property like at 10th and C Street Northeast is clearly vacant and is allowed to get by with 20 years of being vacant and taxed as if it was occupied, clearly there's no sense of mission here. There are strategies to be able to catch the property owner, which haven't been employed because there isn't thinking. I'm going on longer than I mean to, but the point is that there's not been an infused sense of mission in the rank of file, at least with regard to inspections. So how do I know, how can we know that the new agency will be more robust in its sense of mission?
I'll start by saying, yes, we do disagree on the view of my staff because I know there are good people working at the agency, and it's important for their work to be recognized and also for us to look at areas where we can do a better job. That is why we do have a strategic plan and an annual performance plan. The annual performance plan sets forth in a clear, transparent, and accountable manner what we are going to do, how success will be measured, and
well, let's speak to the new department.
As far as the new department will also have an annual performance plan, which is something the executive ensures that every agency has one in place, and the budget supports the annual performance plan. So I don't expect anything to be different as far as the way we will hold ourselves accountable, the way we will communicate, what our strategic objectives are, what our key performance indicators are, and the progress we make in achieving those. So if there are ideas or things that people would want to see us work on, they should translate that into concrete objectives and measures so that we can have that robust conversation. Whether it's inspections, there are already measures we have around inspections, and you will see that inspections have increased year over year over year. That means inspections are happening as well. That means there is a focus on responding to issues, be it a complaint, and also conducting proactive work. Proactive program that we have revised has been recognized for the scientific approach to making use of the resources we have. In fact, my chief building official was invited last year to talk to other cities about how to set up a proactive program. There was somebody else earlier on at this roundtable talking about things that they had no idea how their reality works. So we have to rethink how to engage with folks who don't know how things work internally, and how our stakeholders can also provide valuable information and collaborate with the agency for the DOB to be successful. My job doing the outreach is to touch on as many constituents and stakeholders as we can so they are part of the solution. And the testimony provided today is something that we'll look at to see which ideas we can incorporate in the implementation plan.
Well, I let you go on, but I don't think that you really, I don't think your answer was compelling. The new agency will have a more of a sense of mission, because you're not even admitting that your agency is challenged in that regard. I don't know how much I want to go into this, but when a vacant property inspector goes out to inspect a vacant house and meets with the ANC commissioner and refuses to go to the back of the house, which is overgrown with bamboo, I mean, grossly overgrown with bamboo, and there are broken windows in the rear, he won't go to the rear. There's no sense of mission there. And there was actually an alley, so he didn't even have to go on the property to get to the rear. I already mentioned the example of 10,000, or it's 1,000 C Street Northeast. You know, I go by that house from time to time. There are no trash cans there. You know, a house isn't lived in if there's no trash. As far as I know, DCRA has never asked for utility bills, or if it has, I want to understand how the water and electric is sufficient to prove occupancy. Better yet, I mentioned the trash already. And yet we know from the auditor's report in 2017 that the property owner went into Real Property Tax Assessment Appeals Commission with some understated, underutilized utility bill and got RIPTAC to change, overrule DCRA, and DCRA did nothing more. I mean, I think it's fraud. I really think it's fraud, not by the department, but against the department. And the department has allowed that to happen. I'll give another example. Because I brought this to your attention, a vacant property in Ward 4, where the property owner objected to it being classified as blighted. The property owner submitted dozens of pages of testimony, photographs, and so forth. And the best DCRA could do was to submit a 4-sentence statement. That was your general counsel. I hope you'll remember, I wrote you about this, a 4-sentence, that was it entirely, rebuttal. And so the property was reclassified. And in fact, the property owner asked it to be reclassified from blighted to vacant. And your general counsel simply misread it and told the tax office to change it to class 1. There's no sense of mission. So property on 5th Street Northeast, I've written you about it. The back of the house is missing. And yet it's still classified as vacant. There's no sense of mission here. And so to say I don't expect anything to be different, that's not assuring at all with regard to the new Department of Buildings. The act calls for the creation of a strategic enforcement administrator under the director, who is tasked with developing and implementing strategic and data-driven deployment of the department's enforcement efforts. How does the administration plan to fill this role? What qualities does the administration see as important for this position?
I'll respond to your question about the strategic enforcement position. The background is that with any senior position, there is a position description that is done, classification, recruitment, interviews, onboarding, and retention of that employee. That is done in collaboration with the Department of Human Resources. So with respect to this position in particular, we will be following that same process. We will be looking for scenarios where individuals who are highly qualified will be vetted, and where council sign off or approval is required, it is handled appropriately. That is how we plan on filling the strategic enforcement.
So what qualities does the administration see as important for this position?
There are a few that are obvious or maybe not so obvious. One, the individual or the person who fills a role will have to have some understanding of codes, regulations, mission of an agency, the housing or issues that are in the district or are in other jurisdictions, so that they can bring that knowledge to bear. The ability to inspire, lead a team, the ability to formulate a cohesive plan grounded in data, the ability to marshal resources to execute against the plan, the ability to monitor the plan, put course corrections in place, the ability to build relationships, influence people who may not directly report to that person within the organization or at sister organizations, the ability to surface issues or even predict issues before they happen. These are some of the qualities, and there are the personal qualities as well. One will be the desire to make a difference, the endurance that an individual will need to have to pursue perfection, being candid, truthful. Those are a few that come to mind, and we'll be taking the appropriate steps to make sure that we put our best foot forward when it comes to the person who will fill this spot, given its importance.
A data-driven approach requires consistent, effective cross-agency collaboration. What memorandums of agreement or understanding will the Department of Buildings have in place with other agencies to effectively share data?
When it comes to data, again, I think a lot of people are mistaken. We share data with other agencies already. The investments we've made in our data, whether it's efforts to clean it up, efforts to make it accessible, is pretty much known for those who face the truth. When it comes to sister agencies, we have application program interfaces, which is a piece of software that allows other agencies to tap into our data. And other agencies also have data sets that we tap into. That's one of the reasons there's something called the Open Data Portal that the Office of the Chief Technology Officer manages, where agencies, put data. So if there is some specific data that somebody is looking for that they've not elaborated, they should, because we are not going to operate off hypotheticals and just go sign an MOU. MOU for what? There has to be a purpose. There has to be some scope defined. So I would encourage them to tell us what they are looking for, and then we can assess what needs to be done in that area. But maybe a starting point for them is to look at the data we've made available, data available in the Open Data Portal, and try to explain why an MOU is needed for some data that we don't know what they are talking about.
Well, does DCRA have MOUs now?
Yes, there are several MOUs that we have with our different agencies, and they cover a number of different areas.
Do they cover data sharing?
There are some data sharing agreements in place, but by default, we make our data available. And in areas where agencies have data of interest, we look to see if it's available on the Open Data Portal. So I don't want to talk about hypotheticals in terms of MOUs. Somebody needs to tell me that they are looking for.
Wait a minute. So DCRA, it's not hypothetical if DCRA has MOUs. With whom do you have MOUs?
We have MOUs with different agencies. For example, when it comes to the Office of the State Superintendent of Education, we have MOUs that govern some of the work we do around childcare centers and sharing information with them as well. There are other agencies that we are having conversations with too in this current year about data sharing. We also have data sharing agreements with Office of the Chief Financial Officer. For example, as you may know, when it comes to the ownership of a property, we don't create that information. We depend on Office of the Chief Financial Officer, OTR, for that information.
And you have an MOU for that?
Yes.
Do you have an MOU with the Office of Administrative Hearings?
I'm not aware of any MOU with the Office of Administrative Hearings.
Shouldn't you have one so that you can get data from them with regard to the final disposition of civil infractions?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. We have our own ways of displaying the disposition of our cases, because when a case is drawn to a conclusion, they issue something called a final order. And once we receive that final order, we transcribe the information and make it available. When you go to dcra.dc.gov, you can put in an address and you can see the fine amount, whether it's been paid or not, whether a final order has been issued or not, or the status of that NOI. So this also goes to illustrating there's a lot of misinformed perspectives and opinions. Data is available on our website, and data is an area where we'll try to continue to do better.
What changes are being made to the remaining organizational structure, which will be the Department of Licensing and Consumer Protection? I think you've touched on that, but if you could just go over that again in a summary way.
As far as the Department of Licensing and Consumer Protection, which will be the remainder of our DCRA, some of the changes that we've looked at, that we put in the plan, is having, for example, a chief of staff, having key personnel, and also ensuring that there is integration between the corporations division and the business licensing division. When somebody forms a company like an LLC, ensuring that that information is available to the licensing specialist helps down the line.
That's not the case now?
There is, but there's deeper integration for the benefit of our customers. So for example, if you are applying for a license we can say, oh, you don't have your corporate entity set up. Or if you set up your corporate entity and you have not filed your biennial report, if you are engaging with us on a licensing matter in the future, we'll be able to tell you, hey, this is coming up. This is something you need to be aware of to avoid some fines and late penalties. This is just a small example about how deeper integration between divisions in the licensing realm will help our customers and go beyond some of the practices that we have today.
With regard to the transition to the new Department of Buildings, what external stakeholders have you engaged with?
The plan that we have calls for outreach to different stakeholders. I've had informal conversations already with, for example, the Apartment Owners and Builders Association in Oba, DCBIA, just to name a handful. But when you look at our communications strategy, we've identified specific audiences that we'll be engaging with. Associations, council staff, sister agencies, some of our federal partners, and that's quite an extensive list. The net effect that we envision is that our stakeholders will be sufficiently aware of the two agencies, how to access services from each agency, and how they can continue giving us feedback, and how we will build upon the successes that we've had when we were DCRA.
I got confused. This is telling the stakeholders how they can access different services?
Yeah, so let's talk about who we define as stakeholders.
No, so you said yes to that.
Yes.
My question was, what external stakeholders have you engaged with as part of this transition, as in working through issues with them, opposed to telling them who they can talk to?
I started by identifying the informal conversations we've had with a couple of groups that I mentioned, EOBA, DCBIA. That's already happened. In the plan itself, we've identified the various stakeholders that we would engage with as part of the rollout. We are in February, and we have up until the end of the year to complete the plan. So you should expect more public meetings, more discussions with our various stakeholders that we've identified as we ramp up the strategic communications and stakeholder engagement.
And this is to tell them what's happening or to listen to their suggestions?
We do multiple things. Tell them where we are, what's happening, hear their thoughts, and hear if there's something new that we've not heard, because we maintain lines of communications with our stakeholders. We do that. We do have even like monthly meetings with different stakeholders now. That is not going to change. So the existing channels of communication would remain. We will ramp up activities specific to the implementation of the Department of Buildings and hear what thoughts they have about things we should consider.
What, if any, analysis was done for the strategic human capital plan to determine the appropriate level and allocation of staff resources for the Department of Buildings?
As you know, we did an analysis, and ultimately the OCFO issues a fiscal impact statement around the resources necessary. So that has been settled. And that is why we have funding to implement the Department of Building. The second layer, so that's sort of like the first layer of analysis, what is needed and what we were given. Based on what we've been given, we've also analyzed the challenges that we face today, which was not predicted when the Department of Buildings was being formulated. The pandemic, the wellness of our staff, their emotional, physical, and mental well-being, the demands of our customers. And we've figured out how best to support our staff and our customers as part of our broader strategies. Through the budget formulation process, if there are any changes, we would have those conversations as well. So to summarize, first level of analysis was done, which resulted in a FIS. Funding was provided to implement the DOB. We've reviewed our current operating posture, the changes that have occurred, and how best to ensure that we align our resources that we have and what is coming to meet the intent of the Department of Buildings.
So you have not retained a consultant to advise with regard to the strategic human capital plan for the new agency?
No, and I don't think we need that. We already have a culture change team that has been working with the agency and that has reviewed the Department of Buildings, and that has played a role in shaping the strategic human capital plan that we've submitted, which goes beyond just putting people in an org chart, but it looks at how to empower staff, specific training that staff will have to take, leadership programming that we can do to build our talent base and ensure that we are delivering the best level of service that we can with our existing human capital. So a lot of thought has gone into it. If you look at even the types of our training that have been identified, it's over 24 that will be implemented over a 2-year period. And that speaks to the level of commitment to ensuring a smooth transition and also the professionalism and the thought that has gone into implementing this plan in the middle of a pandemic.
What, if any, improvements did the strategic human capital plan identify regarding staff trainings, particularly those related to building and housing code?
Repeat that again, please.
What, if any, improvements did the strategic human capital plan identify regarding staff trainings, particularly those related to building and housing code?
When it comes to building and housing code, we know that a big part of a successful identification of code violation is having the appropriate certification. We require our housing inspectors to be certified in property maintenance, the ICC certification. That is something that we know.
But that's current.
But they have to maintain it.
Okay, my question is what if any improvements did the strategic human capital plan identify?
All right, I'll draw your attention to page 20. Some of the areas include advancing racial equity, change management, clarity and conciseness in business writing, communicating non-defensively. These are all part of the areas that we've identified that staff will have to be upskilled in to make them more effective. And the list goes on. Some have to do with cybersecurity, because people are using mobile devices and they can be subject to phishing attempts, and how to safeguard the information from our clients and customers. Digital communication, emotional intelligence, managing conflict effectively, because we know when we get into certain housing inspections, sometimes the tenant has certain challenges based on friction with the landlord. We don't want to be in the middle of that. We have to be able to communicate non-defensively about why we take certain actions. This is just an example of a broader human capital preparedness that we've put some thoughts into, and we have a plan on implementing to ensure that our staff have the appropriate training, the tools to succeed.
Give me just a Director, I don't think I have any other questions for you today. I do want to reiterate a concern, if I haven't conveyed this already, that I'm afraid too much of the plan at this point is simply replicating what exists, taking pieces out of the current DCRA, and that's the new agency, instead of doing some creative thinking about structuring a new agency. We will probably talk about this a little bit when we have your performance oversight hearing at the end of the month, although we won't be spending an entire hearing on it. So I'm going to thank you for your testimony. And we will probably have another hearing specifically on the Department of Buildings, either after the, I believe it's the 180-day report or the next quarterly report. So let me just remind the public that the record in this matter for this hearing, which is on implementation of the Department of Buildings Establishment Act, that's DC Law 23-269, the record will close at 5 p.m. on Tuesday, March 1st, 2022. I want to thank the witnesses, all of them. The time is 3:45 in the afternoon. This hearing is adjourned.